Let's talk about Iran. At this moment, a very tenuous ceasefire holds, or maybe by the time I'm done filming this, it won't hold. Here was Donald Trump this morning expressing his frustration about violations of the ceasefire.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
Now, if this ceasefire takes effect or it remains in effect, that will be a very strong positive for the whole region, indeed for the whole world. It will mean that no U.S. service members were injured in Iran's retaliation against our base in Qatar. It will mean, hopefully, an end to the fighting between Israel and Iran and the loss of life as a result of that war. It will also mean that, at least for now, Iran has chosen not to escalate because of the vulnerability of the regime, because of the weakening of its defenses by Israel, and for a host of other reasons. So if this holds, that will be an unmitigated positive. Does that mean that this operation has ultimately improved our security or Israel's? That is a much less clear question. Let me explain what the impacts of this attack on Iran's nuclear facilities mean for your security and the security of Israel and the rest of the world. But before I do, let's talk about Iran and its nuclear program. This is important context to understand what just took place. So for decades now, Iran has had a nuclear program. And I think the first thing to understand about this is there's no need, no legitimate peacetime need for Iran to have a nuclear program. Iran has plenty of oil and natural gas to supply more than its energy needs. So this is not an economic necessity, it's not a peacetime necessity. Iran has pursued a nuclear program for decades because it believes that having a nuclear program will be a deterrent to the rest of the world from attacking Iran. Now, what Iran has decided to do, at least since the early 2000s, is be a nuclear threshold state. That is, up until about 2003, it had a program that was both enriching uranium to levels you might see consistent with a civil nuclear energy program, but it was also engaged in clandestine work potentially towards a nuclear bomb. After 2003 or thereabouts, Iran apparently made the decision not to, for now at least, pursue a bomb. That is, not to enrich to weapons grade, not to develop the mechanism of a bomb, or to develop the means of delivering that in terms of a miniaturized warhead. That was the status up until the recent strikes that took place. Now, both Democratic and Republican administrations have made it clear that the U.S. policy is that Iran should never have a nuclear weapon. That is a policy imperative and objective that I share and transcends party lines. Why is this so important? Well, for a variety of reasons. First, Iran is the leading sponsor of terrorism in the world. You don't want the #1 sponsor of terror in the world to have a nuclear weapon. That would threaten Israel, that would threaten the United States, or that would threaten any other country. But second, if Iran is allowed to develop the bomb, then every other nation of capacity in the region will feel it needs to develop the bomb. So Saudi Arabia will feel it wants the bomb, and Qatar will want the bomb, and UAE will want the bomb, and everyone will want the bomb in the Middle East. And the last thing in the world that we need in this world is a Middle East in which multiple nations are armed with nuclear weapons. That is a disaster waiting to happen of the highest order of magnitude. So it is imperative we prevent Iran from having a bomb. But multiple generations have wrestled with the question of whether a military strike, like Trump just ordered and took place, or diplomatic means is the best way of preventing Iran from actually getting the bomb. During the Obama administration, there were lengthy negotiations which resulted in something called the JCPOA. This was a nuclear agreement that put limits on the number of centrifuges or the type of centrifuges Iran could use, the level of enrichment. It was a time-limited agreement, but it also provided for vigorous inspections, and it prohibited, at least on paper, it prohibited Iran from ever developing the bomb. Now, this agreement wasn't perfect. It didn't attack Iran's non-nuclear state sponsorship of terrorism, and it didn't prevent Iran from developing more and better centrifuges to create faster, higher enriched uranium, but it did outlaw Iran from having a bomb, and it was achieved through diplomatic means. When Trump became president the first time, he withdrew from the agreement. And the result was tragically predictable, and that is Iran went back to enriching uranium to a much higher degree than it would have been allowed to under the JCPOA. When Trump came to office the second time, ironically, after having left the JCPOA in the first term, Trump immediately began negotiating with Iran over what looked like a second JCPOA. Now, there was pushback when it was learned that the agreement that Trump was negotiating would continue to allow Iran to enrich. And it looks like the Trump administration had a change of direction in which they started to insist that their nuclear agreement would require that Iran give up any enrichment whatsoever. Iran refused. And that brought us to where we are today. It brought us to the decision by Donald Trump to bomb 3 significant Iranian nuclear facilities. The one at Fordo, that is buried in a mountain, the one at Natanz, which has a lot of the centrifuges doing the highly enriched uranium, and Isfahan, which stores a lot of the nuclear material, a lot of the highly enriched material. So the US bombed these sites. Now, what is the net effect of this? Is our security greater in the wake of these attacks, or is it less? And the candid answer is we simply don't know, because it will not be completely up to us. It will depend a lot on how Iran responds to this attack on its nuclear facilities. And it will also depend on what kind of damage these aerial bombardments did to Iran's facilities. Here is what we don't know. In the days leading up to the attack, there were observed on commercial satellite a score of trucks, about 16 in total, that showed up at Fordo and that evacuated something from Fordo. Now, did they remove highly enriched material from Fordo? That is, does that material still exist? J.D. Vance's answer here indicates that some of that enriched material may not have been destroyed.
You know for sure where all the highly enriched uranium is?
Well, Brett, I think that's actually not the question before us.
So one question is, how successful was the bombing run? Is there still highly enriched material out there? Is there enough material still out there in Iran to produce multiple nuclear weapons? Another question is, how long would it take Iran to rebuild these nuclear facilities? There will be a damage assessment undertaken that is going on right now, in which our military and intelligence agencies try to determine how significant was the setback to Iran's nuclear program. But probably the most significant question is, what is Iran's long-term and near-term response to this attack? It could take multiple forms. It could push them to the negotiating table. It could also push them to now make a dash to develop a bomb. That is, Iran may make the determination that being a threshold state, as it was in the past, is not enough. It needs to be a nuclear state the way North Korea is if it's going to avoid further attacks on its nuclear facilities, or what Iran most cares about, attacks on the regime itself. So it could have the effect of Iran sprinting towards a bomb, and in that respect making our security worse, not better. This is the reason why I oppose the military strike. That is, the risks of it making the situation worse were at least as great as the risks of making the situation better. And in the absence of an imminent threat that Iran was breaking out to build a bomb, that risk, in my view, was not a risk worth taking. Now, was Iran breaking out to develop the bomb? I've seen no intelligence that suggests it was. And indeed, the Director of National Intelligence testified only in March that Iran had not made the decision to build a bomb and was not building the mechanism of a bomb. Did something change between March and the present? I think the answer is no.
Well, Casey, I'm a member, as you said, of the Gang of Eight. We're supposed to know. I have no foggy idea what this administration's plans are or what the foreign policy is vis-a-vis Iran. Last Thursday, when these attacks started, the president said, well, Israel's doing this on their own, and We obviously have been willing to help Israel defend itself. Israel has that right, and Iran is they are bad actors. But I also know that there's been no change in the intelligence that was Director Gabbard, the DNI, put out in March that's saying Iran had not made a move towards a nuclear weapon. Well, Casey, I can tell you this. We got a brief as recently as Monday that seems ages ago that said the intelligence community has not changed their assessment that Iran had not moved towards an actual weaponization. They've clearly enriched additional uranium, but there is then how do you put that in a weapons form and how do you deliver it? And if this president is going to suddenly blow off all of the consensus opinion of the intelligence community, well, what are these folks' job? Their job is to speak truth to power, not cook the books. When you cook intelligence, you end up with a war like Iraq.
That has nothing changed in terms of our intelligence. Here is how Pete Hegseth tried to dodge the question of whether the intelligence had changed to justify these strikes.
Well, I would just simply say that the president's made it very clear. He's looked at all of this, all of the intelligence, all of the information, and come to the conclusion that the Iranian nuclear program is a threat, and was willing to take this precision operation to neutralize that threat in order to advance American national interests, reduce the Iranian nuclear program.
And here's Marco Rubio trying to dodge the same question, arguing falsely that somehow it just doesn't matter whether Iran was trying to build a bomb.
Are you saying there that the United States did not see intelligence that the Supreme Leader had ordered weaponization?
That's irrelevant. I see that question being asked in the media. That's an irrelevant question.
No,
they have
that is
everything
the
they
key
need to build a
point
weapon.
in U.S. intelligence assessments. You know that.
No, it's not.
Yes, it was.
No, it's
that
not.
The political decision had not
I know
been
that better
made.
than you know that, and I know that that's not the case.
But
you
I'm
don't know-
asking
you
you
don't
whether
know
the
what you're
order
talking
was
about.
given.
And the people who say that, it doesn't matter if the order was given.
In light of those responses and the lack of intelligence shared with Congress supporting the conclusion that Iran had changed course and was actively pursuing the building of a bomb, I think it's fair to assume that intelligence did not drive this decision. This is also important for another reason, and that is the constitutionality of the president's order to attack these targets. That is this lawful, what the president did? Whether it is constitutional depends on a couple things. It depends on the imminence of an attack on the United States by Iran, of which there was no evidence. But it also depends on whether the decision to bomb these nuclear facilities was likely to embroil the U.S. in armed conflict with Iran. And that is simply unclear. And given the lack of clarity on those issues, I think these strikes were unconstitutional. So what is the remedy by Congress when a president arrogates to himself the decision to engage in military strikes that could lead the nation into war? It's something called a War Powers Resolution. This is a statutory vehicle created in the wake of the Vietnam War that allows Congress to force a vote. It is a privileged resolution to force a vote on whether those hostilities can be continued. Tim Kaine has introduced a War Powers Resolution to prohibit sustained hostilities with Iran. That is a resolution that I support. I've been working with him on some of the language of the resolution. This will not prevent, if it is passed, it will not prevent the United States from defending itself and defending our troops and our citizens anywhere in the world. It will not prevent the United States from providing Israel with the defensive and intelligence support, but it will ensure, I hope, that we don't have another endless war in the Middle East. So I will be voting for that War Powers Resolution on the floor. Finally, let me just say this. I am enormously grateful for the skill, the courage, and the professionalism of our service members that conducted this strike, even though I don't believe this strike should have been ordered. Nevertheless, our pilots returned home safely, of which I am endlessly grateful. They performed that mission with great skill and capability. There were 7 B-2 bombers involved that hit these sites, cruise missiles also used to degrade Iranians' nuclear capability. I hope that mission will succeed. I hope that it will denigrate Iran's nuclear capability. I hope that Iran won't choose to try to rebuild its nuclear program. I also pray for the continued safety and security of our service members all over the world, and I pray for peace in the region and continued security for our ally, Israel.